Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 International eConference on Atheism. My name is Dr. Darren Slade. I'm the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, and I want to say thank you so much for being a participant with us and joining us. The incredible thing is that you have actually been joined by people from all 7 continents on this planet during this 3-day virtual event. And that's what the incredible thing is with these virtual conferences is you didn't have to pay for an airline ticket or a hotel room. You get to hear the latest philosophical and scientific research on religion from the world's greatest scholars, all from the comfort and safety of your own home. And with that said, I have the distinct privilege of being able to introduce our next presenter, somebody who I refer to as an up-and-coming shockwave in the atheist community, one Erin Lewis, who will be talking about her experiences from a stripper's perspective on how to debunk the world. Now, Erin is the wildly popular author of several books documenting her unique experience and perspective, including the book Think You Want to Be a Stripper? And Dirty Money, Memoirs of a Stripper. She has almost 20 years of experience being an exotic dancer and is now a vocal atheist activist. I want to read a quote from her website because I think it perfectly encapsulates exactly what Erin is doing. She says, "Years of taking risks, enduring judgments, and self-doubt taught me that to be truly happy meant rejecting mainstream society's idea of who I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to believe. I hope to help lead others down the path to their own self-acceptance. My mission now is to help people live their best lives without the need to please other people who may be miserable in their own. Whether it be discarding dilapidated belief systems, unrealistic ideals, or simply the fear of judgment, finding the courage to be yourself can be daunting. By sharing my stories, I hope to show that you are ultimately in control of your own life and that you alone have the power to control your own happiness." And that's exactly what takes place in her most recent publication called Expose Yourself. And in this book, she promotes critical thinking and self-confidence through her unique sense of humor, challenging insights, and of course, her unique life experiences. This book really will help you find the freedom to be yourself, find confidence in taking risks, and of course, changing your life. And as a special offer, what's fantastic is that Erin has offered a special promotion to everybody who's in attendance today. If you look to the right of your screen, you should see the word offers, and it should have a little red circle with the offers. There, Erin is offering everybody in attendance today $5 off any one of her signed books. She will sign a book and you get $5 off of it. All you have to do is click the blue button and it'll take you to her website. I highly recommend that you take advantage of this deal. And with that said, I'm happy to introduce my friend Erin and say thank you so much for being here. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you for having me. It's pretty exciting. Hopefully one day we'll all get to meet in person. So today I have a little talk on how to debunk the world from maybe a little bit of a different perspective than what you're used to. So as a stripper, presenting fantasy was my job, a skill I became particularly good at. Learning to debunk fantasies others would seek to present as truth is something I became good at as well. When I started writing my first book in 2012, I was a little apprehensive writing about the adult entertainment industry. While it's true that I was annoyed by the misconceptions and stereotypes that existed in the mainstream media, I wasn't sure if I actually had the balls to write the truth as I know it. When I mentioned the idea to several colleagues, I got some pushback and even a few warnings. At one point, I was even threatened about exposing some of the darker sides of the adult entertainment industry. Yes, I know most of the other books about stripping talk about prostitution, rampant drug use, and abuse by staff and partners of strippers and other dark stuff. But the actual truth is much darker, and honestly, I was afraid to tell it. In the end, I decided I would write about my own life in the industry. I figured I would simply offer a counter argument to the stereotypical depiction of strippers that was currently out there. I changed all the names except mine in my first book in an effort to appear to be protecting those who might be embarrassed by my stories. I also changed the names of the clubs so that it looked like I was really exposing secrets that the clubs wouldn't want out there. In essence, I wimped out. I gave in to the pressure to keep quiet. In my latest book, Expose Yourself, I have decided to tell the real truth about the adult entertainment industry and the people involved. It is far scarier than you could ever imagine. This is going to sound crazy, and perhaps it is, but strippers have been involved in almost every major effort to repress the sexual revolution since the 1960s, in some cases even disposing of problem informants. Yes, really, strippers and those involved in the industry have been involved in an extensive, coordinated effort to demonize sex and stripping in mainstream society. Getting that off my chest is a huge relief, although I expect the backlash to be equally huge. All of the books and talk shows that talk about how damaging the sex industry is to women and men and even society as a whole have been carefully orchestrated by the very people they are meant to disparage. While it may seem like free love and open sexual expression would be a great thing for strippers, it wasn't. Just like the legalization of alcohol hurt the moonshine business, the idea that sex would become normal, even accepted in polite society, was a huge threat to strippers. If nudity were to become mainstream, there would be a lot of ass shakers who would have to get real jobs, or even worse, become subservient housewives. The very lucrative business of manipulating horny men would be destroyed. Like a lot of industries that are threatened by progress, the strip clubs had to find a way to combat this new push towards the acceptance of sexuality. Religion and conservative politics became the perfect cover for protecting the livelihood of exotic dancers. I know it seems nuts, but the fact that misogyny is so rampant in religious texts and its respective dogma made it a perfect vehicle to combat the hippies burning their bras. The whole underground secret maneuvering actually started in San Francisco in late 1969 with a few strip club owners, and it still operates today. While only a few dancers are involved, there are a good many who met in secret once a year to set the agenda. Here's where the real risk in exposing this becomes apparent. Before retiring, I was one of the dancers who personally witnessed the coordination and development of this agenda. When I lived in Las Vegas, I attended one of these conferences. They are usually scheduled in late January to coincide with the Adult Entertainment Awards. This is a huge event and provides a good cover for the owners and stripper operatives in Las Vegas. Also, January is usually a slower time for strip clubs in general. After the Christmas holiday spending binge and before people start to get their tax refunds, it's a perfect time to take a break from the club. I learned about these meetings from a friend of mine who is fairly high up in the ranks who was invited to attend. She thought I could be helpful to the cause because of my Catholic background. The strippers who are a part of this all act as intel gatherers because they are on the front lines, so to speak. The entertainers can gain all sorts of information helpful to the clandestine efforts. Guys with hard-ons are pretty easy to get information out of. I was surprised to learn that most of the actual operatives were not strippers themselves, but older men and women who have placed themselves high up in political and religious movements. You've probably heard, if not all of them. I won't repeat all of their names here for legal and personal safety reasons. They are the people who speak against sexual expression in all its forms. They push legislation and policies that speak to the immorality of public nudity. You know, the pearl clutchers and pious conservatives who seem intensely sexually repressed. They frown upon any and all open sexual expression and are great at keeping up appearances, but in reality are usually quite perverse. In fact, a few of the prominent conservative activists who get caught doing dirty shit are actually involved in the scheme. Remember Jim Baker? I know the reason Tammy wore so much damn makeup. Almost no one knows she was actually a very popular stripper in her time. She went by the name of Chastity. Jim himself was adamant in advocating the demonization of sex, until he got a little too greedy, of course, and got caught. Strip club owners are funding the effort for obvious reasons. Because strip clubs deal mostly in cash, it is a great way to grease the political wheels outside of the official books. Strip clubs function much like mafia-run businesses, and the money flows like glitter. I'm fairly certain that there are several well-known and not so well-known mafia members involved as well. I have known loose-lipped strippers who have stumbled on some of this activity, and well, I'm fairly certain they're now chilling with Jimmy Hoffa, wherever he ended up. Swimming with the fishes, if you catch my drift. Now do you understand why I was afraid to speak up? Writing about boners and sweatpants was something much safer. There are two reasons why I'm choosing to talk now. The first is that I'm no longer in the business and the risk is slightly less. The second and main reason is the efforts to push religion in government are ramping up. With music and media becoming more and more sexually graphic, the efforts of this dark stripper illuminati are becoming more brazen. As sex and nudity become more acceptable, society is starting to see that the shame and guilt that religion attaches to sex is bullshit. Strip club owners and some dancers are drastically escalating their efforts. There is a disproportionate number of religious people controlling our government. There are bills right now trying to get the Bible taught in classrooms. These bills are designed to create more strippers and strip club customers. They understand that the more that they make sex dirty, the more people will be drawn to strip clubs and other facets of the sex industry. It is simple biology, which is why science is being demonized as well. Take away the guilt and shame, and the strip clubs go away too. The threat, my friends, is very real. Or not. Were you intrigued? Incredible as that tale was, did it make sense? Because much of what I said is complete and utter bullshit. There are factual components, but the premise itself is garbage. And yet, when I repeated the lie to several people who would know better, they bought into it completely. In one case, they were really surprised that I was just telling them about it now. Is it really that far-fetched to think that Tammy Faye Baker might have been a stripper at one point? I'm not even trying to be mean, but come on, porn stars wear less makeup. Just there is no mistake. There's no conspiracy of strip club owners pushing a political or religious sexual repression agenda in order to make the sex industry more lucrative. That also means they are not murdering people who talk about it. I offered the stripper Illuminati example as a way to show how easy it is to create a conspiracy where there is none. Weaving a few known true facts in with abject lies is the most effective way to create a conspiracy theory. Conspiracies are just another example of human beings trying to explain things they don't have answers for. Sometimes conspiracies are a way to sell things or push an ideology, or sometimes just to pass the time. Our brains are, for the most part, not satisfied with not knowing how things work, or with an answer that seems too simple. When I was a kid, I had a book of unsolved mysteries that included a lengthy chapter on crop circles. The evidence was laid out meticulously. I was convinced they were made by aliens. I entertained the idea that they were man-made at first, but when the so-called evidence stating that crop circles were too complicated to be made by humans was presented to me in a certain way, I believed it. The idea that someone would take that amount of time and effort to perpetrate a hoax seemed ridiculous. My brain didn't want to accept the simplest explanation. It wanted something more elaborate and exciting. Aliens were definitely more exciting than some dude with a wooden plank, a rope, and way too much time on his hands. Conspiracies are often constructed to explain otherwise mundane anomalies. Oftentimes, the goal of the conspiracy simply doesn't fit the method. The flat earth conspiracy is an example of the method not fitting the goal. While they may be able to invent some bizarre scientific facts to justify the position, the whole thing falls apart when you ask why the government wants us to think the earth is really round. Really, what's the point? Who benefits from convincing the population that the earth is round and not flat? No one. However, there are many who benefit from convincing gullible people that the earth is flat. The people pushing this theory want attention. They want to feel like they belong to a community. Belonging to a club of people who know more than others is a strong motivator here. A way to feel superior to the mainstream sheep who have not yet been awakened to the truth. Conspiracies can be entertaining. Sometimes imagining some deeper meaning or cause to things that have otherwise normal answers is simply fun. Like other types of magical thinking, you can take it too far. The temptation to spread a conspiracy theory can be hard to resist. The look on someone's face when you tell them that strippers and strip club owners are trying to sabotage healthy sexual expression is humorous for sure. knowing when to quit and accept that the most mundane explanation for unusual or suspicious events is important to know. If you're not careful, conspiracy thinking can snowball. Suddenly, there may be lizard people everywhere or chemicals in the water turning the frogs gay. So why is it people are misled so easily? There are various reasons. In the above case, because of my experience, I'm seen as an authority on the issue. Some people simply may take my word for it, like you may have done. My apologies. My personal credentials come from the length of time I spent in the industry. In more mainstream circles, some may see doctors or other professionals as authorities worthy to give advice based on the letters after their name, which is why some people may refer to their naturopaths or chiropractors as doctor. While they may have some impressive looking letters after their names, those professionals are not in fact medical doctors. And yet their advice and recommendations are viewed in many cases as valid medical advice. Unfortunately, many YouTube or other social media influencers can be seen as authority figures as well, something that should in fact terrify us all. Despite having no formal training or education, these authorities gain trust by simply using their charisma and personalities. They use the very fact that they aren't doctors or scientists to their advantage, creating an illusion that they have nothing to gain or no motivation except to expose the truth. Other reasons people believe such crazy ideas as the earth is flat or that viruses are spread through 5G cell phone towers come from the exploitation of our cognitive biases and availability heuristic. That is, we tend to believe information that is more available or vivid in our memories, or information that confirms what we want to believe. When we are constantly seeing news reports of violence in and around the world, we will tend to believe that our world is becoming more violent, when in fact we are living in the most peaceful time in our history. That's true, I checked. The vast majority of the time, what gets the most attention is not representative of the overall big picture. What leads to revenue-generating clicks, shares, and viewers is highly biased and deliberately misleading. The more it sells or furthers a particular agenda, the less likely it is to be factually accurate. The more it furthers what you already believe or want to believe, the less likely it is that you will do the necessary research or fact-checking to find out if what you have just seen or read is actually true. In my experimental narrative about the stripper illuminati, I exploited the cognitive biases I believe the most likely for my audience to hold. I used some known facts as well as my knowledge that a lot of people don't know much about the industry. I have very little doubt that if I put this narrative out there, I could convince quite a lot of people, especially given some of the current reigning conspiracy theories. Compared to some, mine seems pretty rational. With so much disinformation out there in the world, it can be easy to get caught up in some of these theories, even if you know how to fact check. Fear and insecurity can be a powerful driving force in our lives and can lead us to believe stuff that isn't true. If you can realize where your fear and insecurity are driving you to believe or make up things that have no substance, you will have created a natural defense against conspiracy thinking. There are enough real things to fear in the world without having to worry if your microwave is spying on you. If you read or hear something that strikes fear in you, take a deep breath, relax, and do a little fact checking. It is far more likely than not that what is being presented might just be a conspiracy theory designed to scare you. While there is power in fear, there is a greater power in knowing just what is worth being afraid of. So who cares whether people believe in crap? Well, belief in conspiracy theories can be dangerous. Some people may act upon these theories, believing that they are the heroes in the story. Believing that kids are being sold online from a furniture retailer may become all-consuming. That can lead a well-meaning person to focus on what to other people may seem like an obvious falsehood and ultimately distract them from the real problem of child trafficking. They can end up chasing a fantasy, spending hours spreading the misinformation and spinning off into a world of needless fear. Imagine how far that energy would go if spent on fighting and uncovering the actual child traffickers. Looked at in that light, the conspiracy that Wayfair is selling children disguised as expensive commercial cabinets is an actual gift to the real traffickers. In the case of the anti-vaccination movement, There have been cases where social media campaigns have sought to discredit and even threaten leading scientists promoting vaccines, especially in the case of the HPV vaccine. I know people who support most vaccines but have gotten sucked into this particular narrative, siding with the social media experts and personalities instead of actual science. It seems that once they enter and engage in online groups that reinforce these scary but wholly unsubstantiated claims, they seem to take an comfort in the false assurance from other voices in the group than from actual doctors. The explanation I hear mostly for this choice is that Big Pharma is pushing vaccines in order to make money, and that natural alternatives such as vitamins and superfoods are a safer way to go. When I mentioned that the vitamin manufacturers and other purveyors of home remedies were in some case behind these attacks on vaccines are also out to turn a profit, I was met with glassy, incredulous stares, followed by a change of subject. Conspiracies and misinformation are obviously harmful. The anti-vaccination movement has already caused outbreaks in measles and a reduction in herd immunity that will ultimately endanger the most vulnerable. Meanwhile, the fraudulent study and doctor behind it have been thoroughly debunked and disgraced. And still, there are thousands of groups that continue to push this dangerous conspiracy. The conspiracy that COVID-19 is spread through 5G cell phone towers has led to the destruction of property and cost millions of dollars. And yet the people who act on these theories believe they are doing good. They believe they are the enlightened heroes fighting the bad people in the world. The scariest part of those who get caught up in this kind of thinking is that they aren't dumb. Plenty of smart people believe some of the most implausible theories imaginable, and some of these people then act on them, which is why learning not to run with these theories and resist sharing them is so imperative. Most of these conspiracies can be dismissed pretty easily, but often aren't because they either confirm existing beliefs or fear. There are a few questions that you can ask yourself to determine whether something is true. 1, is there a logical explanation to what you are seeing? The simplest and most uninteresting answer tends to be the truth. Just because something seems too simple to be true doesn't mean it's not. 2, how many reputable doctors, scientists, or relevant experts back this claim? If the only place you are seeing the claim is a YouTube video or a meme, or perhaps even your crazy Uncle Eddie, the chance that it is garbage is pretty high. Is there a counter argument? If what you are seeing is something you want to agree with, take a moment to check out the other side. Are you actually getting all the information on the subject, or just what the source wants you to see? A good portion of the time, misinformation may contain a kernel of truth to make it seem more plausible, and then leave out the part that doesn't fit the conclusion it wants you to make. At the risk of sounding cynical, I think that there are some who use these falsehoods as a way to avoid dealing with real problems. Conspiracies can sometimes lead not only to dangerous action, but inaction as well. Conspiracies that are formed on the basis of science denial can be an excuse not to take the necessary but inconvenient steps to solve a problem, like in the case of wearing face masks or reducing our carbon footprint. Conspiracies can lead people to fight imaginary boogeymen, but can also lead people to see actual informed experts as boogeymen that should be ignored as well. Frankly, with all the troubling things going on in the world, the pandemic, the political and social unrest, what truly scares me the most is the rampant conspiracies and misinformation. The boogeymen are not online retailers, Big Pharma, or the deep state, but the people behind this bullshit. The real boogeymen are the ones promoting anti-science and false narratives that are meant to confuse and deliberately scare people. Watching friends and loved ones fall victim to these real boogeymen is what I find so disturbing. Even more disturbing is that once convinced of these falsehoods, facts are rendered useless. I could cite 100 valid studies only to be told that it is just part of the cover-up, to be told I am the one being misled, that I am the sheep. I know I can't be the only one who has lost valued relationships to the likes of Alex Jones and other red-faced asshats. However, fantasies and mistruths are not always scary. Sometimes they can be really fun. This is where my own experience really comes into play here. My whole job was to entertain through fantasy. When I stepped out on stage, I became the lie. I was the deception my audience paid to see. My goal was to make them lose their sense of reality for a moment and get immersed in the dream, albeit kind of a dirty dream. I read body language and facial expressions to further the lie. My customers knew up front that they were paying for this fantasy, although some, despite knowing that it was a fantasy, chose to believe anyway, which resulted in disappointment or, in a few cases, anger. Getting caught up in false beliefs, whether they be the ones you are presented or even the ones you tell yourself, can make you miserable. While fantasies are fun, and I consider myself an expert on the subject, being a willing participant is important. Misconceptions and false information are the fantasies that others are trying to sell you and require skills to debunk them. The best debunkers are always asking uncomfortable questions and know where to find the facts to sort fantasy from fiction. The truth can be elusive, but is always present if you care to look for it. Enjoy the lap dance, but don't go broke because you don't want to believe it's just a fantasy. Because of my natural tendency to doubt what I was told, I often felt a nagging curiosity when the people in my life gave blanket explanations for very complicated things. Receiving an answer such as, it's magic, or you just have to believe, left me perplexed. As a kid, I could never get my head around how my believing in something made it true. Not to mention, forcing yourself to believe in something may work for the short term, but eventually those doubts will return to tap you on your shoulder and say, but are you sure? I started to realize that I was much happier if I looked for evidence instead of accepting things on faith alone. I also realized that some stories presented as truth were meant to encourage conformity. Finding the courage to question the things you're not supposed to is not an easy thing to do. Being told I was rude for asking too many questions as a kid was the quickest way to get me to stop. I didn't want to be rude, so I stopped and I wallowed in my doubt and curiosity. That festering doubt and curiosity turned into the strength that led me to value facts and the truth. That same strength helped me to get over the pressure to conform to what society told me I should look like, act like, and do for a living. I was raised a kind of soft Catholic, and I am the last of 6 kids. My family had mostly given up going to church regularly by the time I came around. The religion itself was presented to me much the same way as Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. I'm not sure I ever really took it seriously or literally at all. The fact that my questions about God and religion were answered much the same way as my questions about Santa left me with atheism as the more logical choice. Of course, I was taught that the word atheist was synonymous with evil. So I didn't actually identify as atheist until I took a moment to actually look up the definition of the word. The idea of an all-knowing, all-good deity watching over you and taking care of you is fairly easy to debunk. When you take a look at the empirical evidence of a deity, the whole thing comes apart. Throw in original sin, Satan and the blood sacrifice, and all the other weird dogma that goes along with most religious beliefs, and it's pretty easy to dismiss outright. If you take a deeper look at the purpose and motive behind the myths, it becomes apparent that they are intended to limit thought and control behavior. Even if you have moved past these religious myths, it can still be difficult to resist the urge to accept a given narrative on its face, especially if the person spinning the lie happens to be particularly charismatic. Never stop asking questions and always research your sources. If you found the strength to recognize the myths for what they are, then you already have the strength needed to debunk everything else. Media of all sorts counts on your emotional responses, much like the way my job counted on those responses. It is designed to play on your existing cognitive biases. Even mainstream news, by its very nature, is meant to be intriguing or exciting. Trust me, I know all about hyping up something for the sake of excitement. The bigger the response, the bigger the viewership, and ultimately the larger the revenue. Social media has the added benefit of not being subject to the same editorial standards or even no standards at all, which is how I got added and then quickly deleted from a hair on fire ex-stripper anti-vax group. Turns out the quickest way to get banned from such a page is to post actual facts. Once indoctrinated to certain misinformation, climbing out of the misinformation hole you have found yourself in is nearly impossible. I believe one of the best ways to avoid getting sucked into false narratives may also be the most difficult. That is to practice healthy media hygiene. Scrutinize where you are taking in information from. Ask yourself the question, is this something I want to believe? If it is, be doubly skeptical. Limiting time spent on social media is important as well. The world won't end while you're reading a magazine or a book. By spending less time online, you may miss what your friend had for dinner or the 100th picture of their dog, but you'll be all right, I promise. It will all still be there when you log back on. By carefully scrutinizing the information and sources you are consuming, you will be much less likely to be exposed to and misled by those hoping for your views and shares. It's not just taking everything in with a grain of salt, it's more like taking it in with the whole damn shaker. Outrage, misinformation, and alarming but inactionable narratives are meant to deliberately upset. Much like when I performed a lap dance, the goal was to keep my customer engaged so they keep buying. The more upset you are, the more likely you are to keep checking in, and the more sharing and viewing you might do. The more emotional the response, the more likely it is that you will buy another song or share misleading information. That's not to say that social and other forms of media are all bad, but they should all be viewed with the idea that what you are viewing is either spun through your own bias or someone else's. Given the fire hose of misinformation available through the internet, picking out the truthful drops can be daunting. Always question whether you are being sold a fantasy. Identify reliable sources to check your facts and information, and remember that for the most part, good news goes largely unreported. Your nightly news would be quite boring if they only reported on how many wars aren't going on, how many kids aren't starving, and how many murders didn't happen. Staying informed without losing sight of the bigger picture can be tricky and takes practice. But it is not only possible, it can be essential to your very well-being. But pursuing truth without bias, whether it's your own or applied to the information you are consuming, is always worth it. So just like you are on the lookout for bullshit from people wanting something from you, and bullshit from people wanting you to fall in line, and bullshit you have always told yourself, like I show in my book, Expose Yourself, you don't have to be a stripper to debunk the world.
Aaron, that was absolutely wonderful. I actually cannot stop laughing my ass off about Strippergate, about the stripper illuminati. I actually wrote, you can even see it in the chat box there. I literally said to myself about 2 minutes before you came down and said, you know, everything I'm saying is bullshit. I sat there and I looked at it, I go, well, this presentation got really weird quickly. And I was sitting here going, debunk a conspiracy theory on my academic conference. You had me so stressed out. So thank you so much. I'm so glad that you questioned then. A lot of your talk, you talk about vetting your sources and going through things. But in this day and age, it's still a daunting task and very hard to figure out which sources are reliable. For instance, you mentioned how many reliable scientists and researchers and experts back this claim. Well, the average person has a right to ask, well, who qualifies as an expert? And how do you know if they're qualified and are in fact a researcher or scientist? And the same thing if when you tell somebody source of information. How do I know? We live in the Fox News era where information is easily manipulated for an ideological agenda. So what do you personally do? How do you vet an expert and a news source?
When it comes to news sources, actually, there's a very good media bias chart that lists sources that I look at. So sources like Routers and AP. So if I see a tweet, for instance, that kind of gets my blood up, I will go and see if that is I will check that information against sources that tend to have no bias at all, that basically just report the facts. And the vast majority of the time, the story that I just read about that, freaked me out is either was really played up for the emotion or, may not be reported yet. And it may be that it takes a while for those more reputable outlets to actually vet the information before they put it out on their own site. As far as people go, I tend to discount somebody who has their own talk show or other agenda. Basically, if you can buy ad space on whatever their platform is, I tend to take them with a large grain of salt, and I look to people that don't seem to have any monetary vested interest in what they're saying.
It's difficult this day and age, though, because at any point somebody could be being paid under the table or behind closed doors, and at any point somebody can look legitimate but not actually be so. So the idea of misinformation and spreading misinformation, do you think that the majority of the time misinformation is being deliberately created by people at the top or who are just trying to profit from the misinformation? Or do you think that misinformation actually starts from stupid people and it just gets spread to stupid people?
I think it's actually I think it's a mixture of both. I think there's plenty of misinformation that gets out there simply because people are bored or they're speculating. Like the Wayfair thing started from a Reddit post. I saw it on a friend of mine's page and they were like freaking out about it. And I didn't comment because I wasn't sure. I was really trying not to like rock the boat, but I saw that people were really ramping themselves up over it. And when I first heard about it, I was like, well, this is really silly because very obviously, if you can buy a trafficked kid online on a cabinet that's being advertised on TV, I mean, it would take literally one person to buy a cabinet and ruin the whole thing. None of it made sense. And so then when I actually researched it and found out where it came from, that was somebody who was simply speculating on something that they thought was kind of weird. And then the people in the chat just kind of ran with it. And that was how the conspiracy was born. I think in terms of actually manipulating social media, as far as like the vote and things like that go, that is a little more malicious and better organized. So I do think it's a mixture of both.
Interesting. Yeah, there definitely seems to be evidence that the cognitive bias can just come into people's mind, or just paranoia. People who are already prone to conspiracy theories are going to maybe immediately come up with connecting dots that shouldn't be connected and then spread it from there. And that kind of leads to my next question. One of the big problems that we have in our society today, of course, is social media. We're not able to, most people seem to be getting their news from Facebook and Twitter. And as you just mentioned, Reddit. These are not reliable sources of information at all. But it is quick and easy, though. And our brains didn't evolve to be rational. Our brains evolved to take the easiest route possible. So what do we do to combat this? Have you found a technique to get people to wake up and help them maybe dig a little bit deeper?
I mean, I'm trying. Have I had any actual effect? I don't know. That was really a lot of the motivation behind my book, was hopefully to try to introduce the concept of critical thinking and to go a little beyond, just the surface level of information that you're taking in. And I was kind of hoping that because my job is, a little taboo, that it might kind of gain an audience that wasn't, that may not necessarily be into, learning about critical thinking, logical fallacies, cognitive biases, and things like that. So I was kind of hoping that the dirty part of my job might really help expose, pun intended, people that wouldn't normally look into something like that, that they might kind of get introduced to it in maybe a bit of a sneaky way.
Interesting. I think one of the more significant parts of your lecture today is the notion that we call it esotericism, right, in academia. This idea that you are a part of a group that knows information or possesses information that other people don't know. And this gives you a real sense of privilege. It makes you feel like you're part of something bigger. So taking this concept, I've often wondered about studying the connection between conspiracy theories, the psychological foundations for why people are susceptible to conspiracy theories, and religion itself. Do you think that there is a conspiracy theory, a conspiratorial element to religion? And I don't mean the idea that religion has just been invented by the Illuminati to control the world. But I'm talking the regular average believer, in a way, engaging in a conspiracy theory when they believe in an all-powerful God controlling the world?
I think from a standpoint of feeling like they belong to a group or feeling like they know more than somebody else, as a layman, I would think that tends to be true. I know that some of the conversations I've had with Christians that maybe not outwardly trying to convert me, but are trying to illustrate their position, will definitely come from a standpoint of, well, you'll find out one day, the light will be shown to you, or, in more extreme examples, you'll find out when you die and go to hell. So I do think that there's an element of feeling superior to people that haven't been awoken to the truth. And I think that that's what we're seeing with the QAnon phenomenon right now, which is probably one of the most disturbing things I've really seen in a long time, just because it really has sucked in a lot of people that I wouldn't expect it to suck in. And those people do tend to be, at least in my own personal anecdotal experience, religious.
Yeah.
Or at least believers in one sense of another. So I do think that there's a connection to that type of thinking.
Yeah, interesting. So definitely there's that esoteric, the sense of a privileged knowledge within religious communities and conspiracy theorist communities.
Although, if we're being fair, I do think that we see that with atheists too.
Okay.
I would absolutely say that there are atheists that feel a certain superiority in debunking others' religion, and I would not exclude myself from that group at all. Sometimes if you're in a contentious debate or discussion with somebody, it's hard to not take that condescending position and be like, well, you believe something with no evidence. So I think that works both ways. I think it's unfair to solely put it on religious people.
Very good. Yes, absolutely. Excellent point. So imagine this. And now with that point you just made, I'm going to add in a second example to this. But imagine this, that you exist on a planet that is in the middle of a cosmic war between good and evil. The devil, who's trying to tempt you, him and his minions, and they're trying to battle for your soul. And you have God and his angels, and they're also battling for your soul. And don't you know that God has a plan, but you combat? It sounds very much to me like a conspiracy theory, right? And I would argue now, with the point that you just made, the opposite, the other side, can engage in the same type of mindset. Imagine that you know for certain that stories about Mithrash Dionysus and Heracles and other mythological creatures and superheroes and Zoroastrianism all fed into this river of religious thought, and that Christianity is merely just a fabricated, that Jesus is merely just a fabricated person, a conglomeration of all these mythical creatures. And if you just knew the information I knew and the parallels, it sounds very conspiratorial to me. It almost like what, to your point, that atheists might connect dots that shouldn't be getting connected. Now, real quick, what initiated your passion for wanting to debunk conspiracy theories? How does somebody go from being an exotic dancer to saying, I gotta clean up the world of idiocy?
So I kind of got involved in the atheist community. I sort of fell into it by accident, really. And through that, through being connected with other atheists and skeptics, I really started to look for things like evidence. So I got connected with, I read the book, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, right? Which basically, debunks everything there is in the whole world. And so I was really interested in that. And I was really interested in that I had been misled. I know that I had been a target of misinformation during 2016 that I didn't find out until later, that I had actually been following pages that were coming from a foreign, that I never bothered to look at. So I guess I would say my own capacity to be misled. I was an avid ghost hunter for 15 years, something I actually wrote. It's probably my longest chapter in Expose Yourself. And so I actually actively looked for ghosts, and I never experienced anything that convinced me. But it was very easy to walk into a situation like that and still have that emotion, and still have that ability to fool myself and to actually elicit emotions that really weren't valid. I scared myself silly. My friend and I, Ouija boards and haunted hotels and cemeteries and all that stuff. And it was a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, when the buzz wore off and I'm going back and I'm looking at the actual information and the experience, there was really certainly nothing supernatural. And while there may have been things that couldn't have been that may not have been actually explained, it didn't contribute to anything that was actually supernatural. So I think I was just really intrigued by the capacity of human beings to fool themselves, which actually, back in caveman times and, as our brains were evolving, that was actually a very useful thing, because it stopped us from getting killed. It was good to take in a tiny little bit of information. If you hear something moving in the bushes, to react to that and to, get out of the way. And it may be nothing, but it could be a saber-toothed tiger coming to eat you. So I was very intrigued by human beings and the way that our minds worked and how easy it is to fool people.
It actually leads up to my next question. I'd like to ask about the world of exotic dancing, because this actually is a world that I have absolutely no knowledge about. If you can imagine, as a former Baptist minister, places like this weren't just forbidden, right? But I'm curious, how many people, when they do show up to strip clubs, is it to fulfill a fantasy? I mean, are they purposely tricking themselves into thinking that something might actually happen with one of the gorgeous women up on stage or something? Is it to live out a different form of fantasy? Why go to a strip club?
Well, I don't like to make blanket statements because there's lots of different types of people that come in. So definitely guys, I would say on the younger side that may be less experienced might have that idea of walking in. As you get to somebody who maybe have more experience, as far as having, interpersonal relationships, jobs, so on the older side, I think that it is almost a form of therapy. They are more aware that what they're walking in is something that is a transactional relationship, and that it might be fun. We might be having a good time. There may be genuine feelings there, but they aren't as likely to get caught up into a fantasy. But yeah, there's definitely a certain sect that will come in that will think that this is like a buffet for dates. And it's not, but there are definitely girls that will take advantage of that.
And so it's a kind of escape for a lot of people who are
definitely.
That makes sense. Going back to religion, and I don't know how you would really know how many pastors, ministers, Catholic priests, things like that would come in, under the cloak of darkness kind of a thing and sneak in. Did you ever encounter that?
I danced for Jesus once. Somebody came in literally dressed like Jesus. It was all sorts of fun. He was a great tipper. None that I had ever had admitted to me. Very rarely did that conversation actually come up as far as like beliefs. Sometimes you would get into an involved conversation, be it philosophical or political even. And so you would kind of find out what somebody's beliefs were. As I started to write for some atheist outlets and things like that and become more involved, I had those discussions more often. But it wasn't something that was really kind of outward. Most of the time, a lot of our conversations had to do with like conversations with customers would have to do more with like their job. It would be people that would be really stressed and just needed to kind of vent. But I can't think of anybody that might have been an actual like leader in any religion, such as a pastor or priest or anything like that. I can't imagine a priest, but I mean, I could have not known.
Right, of course. That's the other thing too. They may not have wanted anybody to know, of course, so they're going to keep it hidden. In the religious circles that I used to be a part of, we would support organizations that tried to, and we would call rescue. They would try to rescue strippers and, of course, escorts and prostitutes. And one of the reasons that they would want to rescue strippers is because it's drug dens, basically, and that women are being exploited, taken advantage of, and hurt. Is there validity to what these religious organizations are saying? Should women be rescued from exotic dancing?
Women should be rescued from bad situations. That doesn't mean that a strip club is a bad situation. Yes, there are drugs, but the same kind of drugs and exploitation that goes around in the strip club goes around in, other types of bars also. So I would say maybe there is a disproportionate amount of danger in dancing if you're coming into it with a naive mindset. But a lot of times the organizations that you're talking about, including one in my own area, that was actually one of the reasons why I wrote my first book, or what actually really pushed me to write my first book, is because it was run by a dancer that I'd worked with. And she was touting that we were sex trafficked, that women in the industry weren't loved, that nobody respected them. In fact, actually, I had somebody come up to me and say, "Don't you want to be loved? Don't you want to be respected?" I'm like, what a crappy thing to say to somebody. Like, what a truly awful thing to say, to assume that nobody loves me. And they were actually, in the strip club, you have to audition to work for a legitimate porn company. You sign contracts, you give ID, you're giving out your social security number. You're not being trafficked. Nobody's pushing anybody out on stage. So it's a choice. And in the case of the group that came into my club, she knew that she was deliberately exploiting the people that didn't know that, dancers aren't being kidnapped off the street to be put on stage. It's absolutely ridiculous. And she knew that for a fact. And also she had chose to use a lot of drugs while she was dancing. And so she basically was projecting her own experiences onto the other dancers and then using that to get donations and all that kind of stuff. She actually is a pastor right now for a church.
So it sounds like you, at least in that particular case, very suspicious of the motivations behind a lot of it.
I didn't have to be suspicious. I knew that they were false. I knew that she was deliberately exploiting the idea that they were rescuing people and specifically traffic victims, which really pissed me off because it really goes into like the Wayfair thing where it's like, you know, people are worried about something that doesn't exist. You know, she's trying to rescue girls that don't need to be rescued and totally ignoring the massage parlor across the street that's open 24 hours and very likely has girls that may have been coming from another country that, you know, that may need to be rescued. So she's basically trying to get resources for something that isn't, you know, she could be devoting those to actually helping people. And instead she's perpetuating stereotypes and misinformation.
Interesting.
So that's really why I started writing, because it really pissed me off because I knew her personally. So I knew her history and I knew she was lying.
Would this belief kind of expand to sex work in general and the stripping industry in general? How do you feel about the sex worker industry? Is this something that should be stopped or should be given free reign? Or
I think that it should be regulated. I think that it should be brought into the light and out of you know, the black market, so to speak. I think that that's where the real danger of traffic victims, people being abused, pimps, things like that. That's really where they're able to do the most damage, is because women that get hurt that way can't speak up because they're criminals. And it will never stop. You're never, ever going to stop prostitution. Given COVID, I think strip clubs might be severely damaged. I certainly wouldn't want to be giving a lap dance right now. But I think in terms of prostitution, I think it's ridiculous that it's illegal. And I think that is actually more harmful than having it legalized and having it brought into the light. And, you know, if you look at it from a tax revenue standpoint, you know, those girls are going to be, if they're above board, they're going to be paying taxes. So you're removing a lot of the cash aspect of it.
Interesting. I'm curious about your colleagues, women who, in your experience, were a lot of the strippers, were they themselves religious or considered themselves religious or spiritual? And if so, how did they justify the job?
Well, there were a lot of like cross tattoos, a couple of Virgin Mary tattoos, which I always found kind of silly. I actually wore a cross a long time because I had it gifted to me from my grandmother. And so a lot of people assumed that I was Christian, but for me, it was just more of it was a symbol of my grandmother. It wasn't really a symbol of Christianity, although I ended up not wearing it anymore because people looked at it the other way. A lot of girls consider themselves spiritual, as far as just believing in a higher power, you know, the universe and that kind of thing. That's what I saw more than anything else. If there was any Christianity involved, I think it was more of a cultural thing, basically like the way that I wore my cross was more of a cultural family thing. It wasn't representative of the actual beliefs. But I think that the presence of a higher power or spirituality, whatever that means, was pretty prevalent.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's prevalent throughout every occupation, so why wouldn't it be there as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. Any more books coming out? What are some of your more up-to-date ideas? I heard that you were getting into fiction writing.
I am getting into fiction writing. So I am working actually with another author. His name is Armin Rosamilia. We are kind of working on like a murder mystery kind of novel Not sure how long that will take. I am working on a series of short stories. I had one that came out in a anthology called Beyond the Grave by Sammy Sands. That's actually available right now on Amazon. If you go to my website, I think I have it up in a blog post, the link. That has my first fiction publication ever in it. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about the little murder mystery that I'm working on right now. So fiction is it's always been something that I wanted to do. So really sort of pursuing my dream at this point.
Yeah, I love it. It's so exciting. Like you said, you're kind of an expert in fantasy. So I think it's incredible that it makes perfect sense you'd start writing fiction. I do want to remind everybody in our that's in attendance that there is the link in the offer section. And if you click that link, you can go to Erin's store and get $5 off a signed copy of any one of her books. And something I didn't mention before, to get that $5 off, put in the coupon code GCRR. And make sure you take advantage of that. And thank you, Erin, for offering that to our guests. And I will give you the last word, but I want to say thanks to everybody for coming. Erin, last word. Thank you so much for sharing.
Well, and thank you for having me. It was fun. Like I said, hopefully we'll get to do some of these conferences in person and actually get to meet and shake hands and do all that stuff at some point. Go ahead and check out my books, and I'm very open to questions, at least until I'm not. So once again, thanks for coming and thanks for having me.